The grand hall of the Jefferson Arts Center buzzed with excitement. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over guests in elegant attire, their quiet conversations creating a gentle hum throughout the space. Tonight was special. World-famous pianist Anton Volkov would perform to raise money for music programs in underfunded schools. Among the crowd stood Rose Miller, a 34-year-old bookkeeper whose simple black dress had been carefully chosen for this rare night out. Her hands fidgeted with her small clutch purse, a habit from childhood that surfaced whenever she felt out of place. Rose wasn't wealthy like most attendees. Her ticket had been a splurge, purchased after months of setting aside a little from each paycheck. "Can you believe we're breathing the same air as Anton Volkov?" whispered her friend Diane, who worked with Rose at the accounting firm. "His recording of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 got me through my divorce last year." Rose nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "His interpretations feel like he's telling your own life story through the keys." Music had always been Rose's first love, though life had pushed her in a different direction. As a child, her grandmother had taught her to play on an old upright piano with yellowed keys and slightly uneven tuning. When her grandmother passed away, the piano became Rose's most precious possession. Each evening after work, she would sit at those familiar keys and lose herself in the world of music that existed only in her small apartment. "Look, there he is," Diane nudged her, breaking her reverie. Across the room stood Anton Volkov, immediately recognizable from album covers and concert posters. At 45, his dark hair was touched with distinguished silver at the temples. His posture conveyed the confidence of someone who had performed in the world's greatest concert halls. A circle of admirers surrounded him, hanging on his every word as he gestured with hands that had mastered some of the most difficult pieces ever written. "Should we try to meet him?" Diane asked. Rose shook her head quickly. "I wouldn't know what to say." "Come on," Diane insisted, taking Rose's arm. "When will we get another chance?" Before Rose could protest further, she found herself being guided through the crowd toward the famous pianist. As they approached, she could hear his voice, deeper than she'd imagined, with the faintest trace of his Russian origins despite years of international living. "The problem with music education today," Anton was saying to his captivated audience, "is that technical skill is valued over emotional connection. Many young pianists can play complex pieces flawlessly, but convey nothing of themselves through the music." Heads nodded in agreement, though Rose suspected most didn't truly understand the difference. She certainly did. Her own playing would never win technical competitions, but when she played, it was as if her heart took over her fingers. "Excuse me, Mr. Volkov." Diane spoke up as they reached the edge of the circle. "We're such huge admirers of your work." Anton turned, his eyes briefly assessing the two women before offering a practiced smile. "Thank you. Always nice to meet music lovers. Rose here plays piano too," Diane added, ignoring the warning squeeze Rose gave her arm. "Is that so?" Anton replied with polite disinterest. It was clear he'd heard this countless times before. "And what do you play, miss?"
"Rose," she answered softly.
"Mostly Chopin. His nocturnes especially." Something in her tone made Anton look at her more carefully. Chopin's nocturnes require a delicate touch. Many find them deceptively difficult. "The difficulty isn't in the notes," Rose responded without thinking. "It's in finding the voice beneath them. Like his nocturne in E-flat major, the melody should float above the left hand like a person speaking in their sleep." A flicker of surprise crossed Anton's face. It wasn't the typical comment he heard at these events. Usually people told him how many years their children had been taking lessons or asked how many hours he practiced daily. "That's an interesting observation," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "Where did you study?" Rose felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't, not formally. My grandmother taught me as a child, and I've just kept playing." A few people in the circle exchanged glances. Anton's expression changed, not to dismissal as Rose expected, but to something more complex. Was it amusement? Curiosity? Challenge? "So you're what they call a natural talent," he said, the words carrying a subtle edge that made several listeners shift uncomfortably. The event organizer, a tall woman named Patricia, approached their group. "Anton, we should begin seating people for the performance soon." "In a moment," he replied, not taking his eyes off Rose. "I'm having an interesting conversation about musical interpretation." Patricia nodded and stepped back, but remained nearby, sensing something unpredictable in the air. "Tell me," Anton continued, speaking a bit louder so others could hear. If technical training isn't necessary, perhaps you could demonstrate your interpretation of Chopin for us. The circle of conversation widened as people backed up slightly. Rose felt her stomach drop. I never said training wasn't necessary. But you seem to have strong opinions about how nocturnes should be played, Anton pressed, his smile not reaching his eyes. The piano is right there. He gestured to the concert grand piano on the small stage, prepared for his performance later. Rose understood what was happening. She'd unintentionally challenged his world, one built on years of rigorous training, competitions, and sacrifice. To him, she represented every amateur who thought feeling alone could replace discipline and study. I couldn't possibly, she said quietly. Why not? Anton persisted. If you truly understand Chopin's voice, as you say, surely you can share that understanding with us. More people had gathered now, drawn by the tension in the air. Rose felt trapped, her heart pounding. Diane leaned close to her ear. You don't have to do this. I think we'd all enjoy a little pre-concert entertainment, Anton said to the crowd, generating uncomfortable laughter. What do you say, everyone? Rose looked around at the expectant faces. Some seemed embarrassed for her, others curious, a few even appeared to enjoy her discomfort. She recognized what this was, a lesson being taught at her expense. Patricia stepped forward again. Anton, I'm not sure this is appropriate. It's just a bit of fun before the show, he replied smoothly. A celebration of music in all its forms. Isn't that why we're here tonight? Rose stood frozen as whispers rippled through the crowd. The situation had spiraled beyond her control. She could walk away, but that meant carrying this humiliation home with her, replaying it during sleepless nights. Or she could play and likely confirm what Anton expected, that she was just another hobbyist with delusions about her abilities, but then she thought of her grandmother and the joy they'd shared at that old piano. How her grandmother would say, music isn't for showing off. It's for sharing what words can't say. All right, Rose said softly, surprised by her own voice. Anton's eyebrows raised slightly. He hadn't expected her to accept. Wonderful, he recovered quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special addition to our program tonight. As murmurs spread through the hall, Patricia guided Rose to the stage steps. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I can stop it, Rose shook her head. It's okay. Though her hands trembled, a strange calm was settling over her as she approached the magnificent grand piano, far superior to her weathered upright at home. She heard Diane call out, You've got this, Rose? The hall quieted as she sat on the bench, adjusting its height. The polished black and white keys gleamed under the lights. Rose placed her hands in her lap, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. In this moment, she wasn't thinking about Anton Volkov or the roomful of strangers. She was thinking about her grandmother's kitchen, filled with the scent of baking bread. About rainy Sunday afternoons spent playing duets. About the peaceful hours alone with music after difficult days at work. When she opened her eyes, her hands moved to the keys with the familiarity of old friends. She would play Nocturne Op. 9, number 2, the first Chopin piece her grandmother had taught her, the one she knew by heart. As her fingers pressed the first notes, Rose felt the quality of silence in the room change. She wasn't in the Jefferson Arts Center anymore. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere only music could take her. And she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated through the hall. Rose's fingers moved with gentle purpose across the keys, each note flowing into the next like a quiet conversation. There was a slight hesitation in the opening measures, not from nervousness but from the unfamiliar touch of the concert grand piano, so different from her worn upright at home. Anton Volkov stood with arms crossed near the front of the stage. He had expected awkward fumbling or rigid amateur playing. What he heard instead caught him off guard. Yes, there were technical imperfections. Her tempo wasn't precisely consistent. Her fingering wasn't what any conservatory would teach. But there was something else present, something that made the small crowd fall completely silent. In the third row, an older gentleman with silver hair leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was Herbert Wilson, a retired music professor who had heard this nocturne performed hundreds of times by students and professionals alike. He removed his glasses and closed his eyes. the better to focus on what he was hearing. Rose had forgotten about the crowd now. The initial terror had melted away the moment her fingers touched the keys. This was her private language, the way she had processed joy and grief throughout her life. As the melody progressed, her body swayed slightly, following the emotional current of the music. Patricia, the event organizer, stood at the edge of the crowd, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. She glanced at Anton, whose face had transformed from smugness to confusion to something harder to read. His eyes hadn't left Rose's hand since she began playing. In the back of the hall, waitstaff who had been preparing for the post-concert reception had stopped their work, trays balanced forgotten in their hands. One young server, a college student named Thomas, was recording the performance on his phone. He had been hired to work these events to pay for his music theory classes, and he recognized something unusual was happening. Rose approached the middle section of the nocturne, where the melody grows more complex and emotionally charged. Her left hand provided a steady, pulsing foundation, while her right hand sang the melody with a tenderness that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her. When she reached a particularly moving passage, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't falter. The audience remained spellbound. Diane, who had heard Rose play only once before at a holiday party, stood with her hand pressed to her mouth. She had known her friend was talented, but had never witnessed this level of emotional expression from her typically reserved co-worker. An elderly couple near the front held hands tightly as they listened. The woman leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, transported to memories of their early courtship. A teenage girl, brought reluctantly to the event by her parents, had stopped scrolling on her phone and was watching with genuine interest, having never expected to be moved by classical music. Anton's expression continued to evolve as he listened. His initial plan to humiliate this amateur had backfired spectacularly. Yes, he could identify at least a dozen technical flaws in her playing, but he also recognized what many technically perfect performers lacked: the raw ability to make listeners feel something profound. It was what his first teacher had called the soul of music, something that couldn't be taught no matter how many hours one practiced. Rose approached the final section of the piece, where the melody returns to its original theme. Her shoulders relaxed and a small smile touched her lips. This was her favorite part, like returning home after a long journey. Her fingers caressed the keys rather than striking them, producing a sound that seemed to float in the air. In the crowd, Herbert Wilson wiped a tear from his cheek. He had taught piano for 40 years and could count on one hand the number of times he had heard playing with this quality of emotional truth. It wasn't about technical precision. It was about the humanity coming through the notes. The young woman at the piano might not have had formal training, but she understood something essential about Chopin's music that many of his most accomplished students had struggled to grasp. As Rose played the final delicate notes, letting them linger and fade into silence, the room held its collective breath. For several seconds after she finished, no one moved or spoke. It was as if they were all slowly returning from the place her music had taken them. Then Herbert Wilson stood up and began to applaud. Others followed immediately, the applause growing into a wave that filled the hall. Surprised by the response, Rose blinked and looked up, suddenly remembering where she was and what had just happened. Her eyes found Anton, who stood motionless amidst the applauding crowd. His expression was complex, a mixture of surprise, professional assessment, and something that might have been regret. He hadn't expected to be the villain in this impromptu drama. Rose rose shakily from the piano bench, her legs weak from the adrenaline crash. She gave a small, awkward bow, unsure of proper concert etiquette. The applause continued, warming her from the inside out. Patricia rushed to the stage, beaming. "That was absolutely beautiful," she said, helping Rose down the steps. "I've never heard that piece played quite like that before." Diane pushed through the crowd to embrace her friend. "You were amazing. Why have you been hiding this gift all these years?" Rose struggled to find words. I never thought it was anything special. It's just how I feel the music." People began to gather around her, offering compliments and asking questions. An older woman pressed a business card into her hand, saying, "My husband and I host a chamber music series in our home. We would love to have you play sometime." Herbert Wilson made his way to her, taking her hand in both of his. "Young lady, I taught piano at Westridge Conservatory for 4 decades, and what you just did is what I tried to teach my students their entire careers. Technical skill can be learned, but what you have, this connection to the emotional heart of the music, is much rarer. Rose blushed, overwhelmed by the attention. Thank you, but I'm really just an amateur. I work as a bookkeeper. Chopin himself would disagree with your self-assessment, Herbert replied with a gentle smile. Music isn't about credentials, it's about communication. As the crowd continued to buzz around her, Rose noticed Anton making his way toward her. The room quieted slightly as people became aware of his approach, curious how the famous pianist would respond to being upstaged at his own event. Anton's face was composed now, his professional mask back in place. He stopped in front of Rose, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, the world-renowned virtuoso and the bookkeeper who played for no one but herself. That was not what I expected, he said finally, his voice carrying in the hushed room. Rose met his gaze. It wasn't what I expected either. A faint smile touched Anton's lips. You have never had formal training? She shook her head. My grandmother taught me basics when I was young. Everything else I learned by ear and feeling. That explains the unusual fingering technique, he observed. Then after a pause, and perhaps also the unusual emotional quality, the crowd watched this exchange with fascination. Patricia hovered nearby, ready to intervene if needed, but the tension in the air was different now, expectant rather than uncomfortable. You play with genuine feeling, Anton continued, choosing his words carefully. Many trained pianists spend years trying to recapture the natural expressiveness they lose during technical drilling. Rose wasn't sure if this was a compliment or an observation. I just play the way the music feels to me. Anton nodded slowly. That much is evident. He seemed to be wrestling with something internally. Finally, he extended his hand to her. Thank you for sharing your interpretation with us. The simple gesture, treating her as a fellow musician rather than an object of amusement, meant more to Rose than the applause. She shook his hand, noting the strength in his fingers shaped by decades of disciplined practice. Will you stay for my performance? He asked, surprising everyone, including himself. Of course, Rose replied. That's why I came tonight. As Anton moved away to prepare for his scheduled recital, the crowd gradually dispersed, though many people continued to glance back at Rose with newfound interest. Diane stayed by her side, fielding questions when Rose seemed too overwhelmed to respond. Are you okay? Diane asked quietly when they finally had a moment alone. Rose took a deep breath and released it slowly. I think so. It all feels like a dream. Well, you definitely woke everyone up, Diane said with a grin, including Mr. Famous Pianist. As they found their seats for Anton's performance, Rose noticed several people pointing her out and whispering. The young server, Thomas, approached her hesitantly. Excuse me, he said. I hope you don't mind, but I recorded your performance. It was just so unexpected and beautiful. I'm studying music theory, and you recorded it? Rose asked, her eyes widening. Thomas nodded. Would you like me to send it to you? Or I can delete it if you prefer. Rose thought for a moment. Having spent her life playing only for herself, the idea of having her performance captured and potentially shared was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. You can keep it, she said finally. And yes, I'd like to see it too. As Thomas took down her contact information, the lights in the hall dimmed. Anton Volkov walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, his posture perfect, his presence commanding the room. He sat at the same piano Rose had just played, adjusted the bench and looked out at the audience. For a brief moment, his eyes found Rose in the crowd, and he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Then he began to play, his technically flawless performance filling the hall with magnificent sound. But Rose noticed something different in his playing tonight, something more vulnerable and human than what she had heard on his recordings. And she wondered if, in some small way, she had touched the famous pianist's heart just as he had touched hers. Anton Volkov's performance that night was technically flawless as always. His fingers danced across the keys with precision earned through decades of rigorous practice and worldwide performances. Yet something was different. The audience sensed it, though most couldn't quite name what had changed. Rose sat mesmerized in the third row, watching his hands create magic from the same keys she had touched just an hour before. She noticed subtle changes in his expression as he played, moments where his usual mask of concentration softened into something more vulnerable. During particularly emotional passages, his eyes would close briefly, something she had never seen in videos of his performances. Diane leaned over and whispered, "Is it just me, or is he playing differently tonight?" Rose nodded slightly. She understood what was happening. Anton was allowing himself to feel the music more deeply, perhaps inspired by her unpolished but heartfelt performance. For a musician of his caliber, this represented a significant shift, a willingness to risk technical perfection for emotional truth. When Anton finished his program with Liszt's La Campanella, a piece known for its technical challenges, the audience erupted in a standing ovation. He took his bows with practiced grace, but his eyes scanned the crowd until they found Rose. There was a question in that look, one musician to another. "Did you hear what I was trying to do?" She gave him a small nod, acknowledging the subtle change in his playing. A faint smile touched his lips before he turned to accept the bouquet of flowers Patricia presented him. As the formal part of the evening transitioned to the reception, guests mingled with glasses of champagne and small plates of elegant hors d'oeuvres. Rose found herself the center of unexpected attention as people approached to compliment her impromptu performance. "I've never heard Chopin played quite that way," said a woman in an expensive-looking blue dress. "It made me think of Moonlight on Water." "Do you perform regularly?" asked another guest. "I'm on the board of the Community Arts Council, and we're always looking for fresh talent." Rose shook her head, still overwhelmed by the attention. "I just play at home for myself." Tonight was unusual. Herbert Wilson, the retired music professor, joined their small circle. "What this young lady demonstrates is what we often lose in formal training, the pure joy of musical expression." He turned to Rose. "Though with some technical guidance, you could develop that natural gift even further." Before Rose could respond, a hush fell over their corner of the room. Anton Volkov was approaching, champagne glass in hand. The small crowd parted to make way for him. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his accent more noticeable in casual conversation than it had been on stage. "Not at all," Herbert replied warmly. "We were just discussing the unusual qualities of Rose's playing." Anton nodded, his eyes fixed on Rose. "I would like to speak with you privately if you don't mind." Rose felt her heart skip. What could the world-famous pianist possibly want to discuss with her? She glanced at Diane, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Of course," she replied, setting down her barely touched champagne glass. Anton led her to a quiet corner of the hall, away from the chattering guests. For a moment he simply studied her as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You're playing tonight," he finally said. "It reminded me of something I had forgotten." Rose waited, unsure how to respond. "When I was a boy in Russia, before the competitions and conservatory, I played like you do. From the heart, without thinking about technique or audience expectations." His gaze was distant now, seeing something from long ago. Somewhere along the way, through years of training and professional pressure, that pure connection becomes complicated. "But you play beautifully," Rose said. "Everyone thinks so." Anton gave a small, rueful smile. "They admire the technique, the precision. But what you did tonight, you reminded me why I began playing in the first place." He took a sip of his champagne. "It wasn't to impress people. It was because the music spoke to something inside me, as it clearly does for you." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "I never had the chance for formal training. My family couldn't afford it after my grandmother died. But the piano has always been my friend, I guess. The place I go when words aren't enough." Anton nodded slowly. "That's precisely what I mean. Many of my students at the conservatory have perfect technique but struggle to express that essential connection." He paused. "I must apologize for earlier. My invitation for you to play was not kindly motivated." "I know," Rose said quietly. "You wanted to teach me a lesson about the difference between amateurs and professionals." He looked slightly embarrassed. "Yes, and instead you taught me something." He set down his glass on a nearby table. "I have a colleague, Eleanor Chen. She specializes in working with adult pianists who have unusual natural ability. I'd like to give you her contact information if you're interested." Rose blinked in surprise. "You think I should take lessons? At my age?" "Age is irrelevant," Anton replied firmly. "What matters is that rare quality you possess, the ability to make listeners feel something genuine. With some technical refinement, you could develop that gift further." From across the room, Thomas, the young server who had recorded Rose's performance, was watching their conversation while balancing a tray of empty glasses. His phone buzzed in his pocket. When he had a moment to check it, he saw that the video of Rose playing Chopin, which he'd shared with a few friends from his music theory class, had been shared again. And again. Comments were flooding in. Who is this woman? She plays with such raw emotion. This is at the Jefferson Center charity event. Isn't that Anton Volkov watching her? Amateur pianist shows up famous concert pianist. You won't believe what happens. Thomas looked up at Rose, still deep in conversation with Anton, unaware that her private moment of music was beginning its journey across the internet. Back in their quiet corner, Rose was trying to process Anton's offer. I don't know if I have time for lessons. I work full-time and piano has always been just, for me. Anton considered this. Music is a gift meant to be shared, Rose. What you played tonight touched everyone in that room. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Eleanor will understand your situation. Just consider it. As Rose took the card, Patricia approached them apologetically. I'm sorry to interrupt, Anton, but the mayor has arrived and is asking to speak with you. Anton nodded, then turned back to Rose. Think about what I said. Talent like yours deserves development, even if only for your own satisfaction. He gave her a small bow and followed Patricia across the room. Rose rejoined Diane, who was bursting with curiosity. What did he say? You two looked so serious. He wants me to take lessons with his colleague, Rose said, showing Diane the card. He says I have a rare quality worth developing. Diane's eyes widened. That's amazing. First, you're the talk of the party, and now you're getting recommendations from Anton Volkov himself. It's all happening so fast, Rose said, feeling slightly dizzy. 2 hours ago, I was just an ordinary bookkeeper who plays piano in her spare time. And now? Diane prompted with a grin. Rose shook her head. I don't know. It still doesn't seem real. As they spoke, Herbert Wilson approached again, this time with a distinguished-looking couple. Rose, I'd like you to meet Michael and Eleanor Chen. Michael is the conductor of the City Symphony, and Eleanor is a piano instructor at the conservatory. Rose's eyes widened as she made the connection. Eleanor Chen? Anton just mentioned you. Eleanor smiled warmly. Yes, he texted me right after your performance. My husband and I were at dinner nearby and decided to stop in. Her eyes were kind but assessing. Anton says you've never had formal training? Just childhood lessons with my grandmother, Rose admitted. Eleanor nodded. Sometimes that's the best foundation. No bad habits to unlearn, just a pure connection to the music. Michael Chen spoke up. What you demonstrated tonight is something we call musical intelligence, an intuitive understanding of the composer's intentions that goes beyond the notes on the page. The technical aspects can be taught, Eleanor added. But what you have, that emotional authenticity, that's much harder to cultivate. Rose felt overwhelmed by their interest. I'm just a bookkeeper who loves playing piano. And I'm just a conductor who loves good music, Michael replied with a smile. Labels don't matter when it comes to genuine talent. Across the room, Anton was speaking with the mayor but keeping an eye on Rose's conversation with the Chens. He felt a curious mix of emotions, regret for his initial unkindness, professional interest in her unusual talent, and something harder to define. Perhaps it was recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who understood music as a language of the heart. Thomas, meanwhile, checked his phone again. The video of Rose had been viewed over 5,000 times in the last 30 minutes and was being picked up by classical music pages and forums. Comments continued to pour in. This is what music is supposed to be, felt, not just performed. Look at Volkov's face when she plays, priceless. Who is she? Does she have any recordings? Little did Rose know as she stood chatting with the Chens that by morning, her playing would have been heard by people across the country. Her private musical world was about to become very public indeed. As the evening drew to a close, guests began to depart. Rose and Diane collected their coats from the check room. Are you going to call Eleanor? Diane asked as they stepped outside into the cool night air. Rose looked down at the business card in her hand. I don't know. This all feels like a dream I might wake up from. But it wasn't a dream. It was the beginning of a new chapter in Rose's life, one that had started with a pianist's unkind joke and was now opening doors she had never imagined possible. Rose woke the next morning, To her phone buzzing continuously on her nightstand. Still half asleep, she reached for it, expecting an early call from work. Instead, she found 17 missed calls, 34 text messages, and hundreds of notifications from social media accounts she rarely used. Confused, she sat up in bed and opened a text from Diane. "Call me now."
You're everywhere online.
Attached was a link to a video. Rose clicked it and watched in stunned silence as her own image appeared on screen, sitting at the grand piano in the Jefferson Arts Center. The footage showed her playing Chopin, captured from an angle that included Anton Volkov standing nearby, his expression changing from smug amusement to undisguised surprise as she played. The video had over 200,000 views. Rose's hand trembled as she scrolled through the comments. This is what pure musical talent looks like before the industry gets hold of it. Look at Volkov's face. He invited her up as a joke but wasn't ready for that. Who is this woman? She plays like she's telling her life story through Chopin. Her phone rang again, Diane calling for what was apparently the 5th time that morning. "Finally!" Diane exclaimed when Rose answered. "Have you seen it?" "The video's everywhere. Classical music pages are sharing it, piano teachers are showing it to their students, and people are trying to figure out who you are." "I don't understand," Rose said, her voice still thick with sleep. "How did this happen? Remember that server who recorded you, Thomas? Well, he shared it with a few friends and it just exploded overnight." Diane was speaking rapidly, excitement making her words tumble over each other. "The Post calls you mystery pianist outshines maestro and people are loving the story. David from accounting just texted me asking if that was really you." Rose sat on the edge of her bed trying to process this information. She'd gone to the charity event as an anonymous music lover and somehow become an internet sensation overnight. The thought made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "I need to get ready for work," she said weakly. "Work? Are you serious? This is your moment. The local news has been trying to contact the Jefferson Arts Center to identify you. They're calling it the Cinderella pianist story." Rose took a deep breath. "Diane, I'm just a bookkeeper who plays piano in her spare time." This is crazy." "Well, crazy or not, you'd better prepare yourself. People are going to recognize you." Rose's prediction proved accurate. When she arrived at the accounting firm where she'd worked quietly for the past 7 years, conversations stopped as she passed. Co-workers she barely spoke to suddenly found reasons to visit her desk, asking casual questions that inevitably led to the video. "I never knew you played piano," said her supervisor, lingering by her cubicle around mid-morning. "My daughter takes lessons and nearly fell out of her chair when I told her I know you." By lunchtime, Rose had received 3 emails from local reporters and an invitation to appear on a morning talk show. She declined them all, hoping the attention would fade if she didn't engage with it. But as the day wore on, the video continued to gain views. Classical music forums debated her technique versus her emotional expression. Piano teachers shared it as an example of natural musicality. And somewhere in the comments, someone had identified her by name and workplace. At 3:47 p.m., her desk phone rang. "Accounting Department, Rose Miller speaking." "Ms. Miller, this is Eleanor Chen. We met last night at the Jefferson Center." Rose sat up straighter. "Yes, of course. Anton Volkov mentioned you. I'm calling because I've seen the video of your performance. I assume you're aware it's circulating widely?" "Yes," Rose admitted. "It's a bit overwhelming." Eleanor's voice softened. "I can imagine. But I'm not calling about the video itself. I'm calling because I heard something special in your playing last night, and I'd like to offer you a chance to develop that gift." Rose twisted the phone cord nervously. "I don't know if I have time for formal lessons. I work full-time and—" "Just one meeting," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Come to my studio, play for me in a more private setting, and we'll talk about possibilities. No pressure, no commitments." After a moment's hesitation, Rose agreed to meet Eleanor the following evening. When she arrived at the address Eleanor had given her, Rose was surprised to find not a formal music school, but a converted carriage house behind a Victorian home. The space was warm and inviting, with wooden floors, large windows, and 2 grand pianos positioned face-to-face in the center of the room. Eleanor greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome to my private studio. I only teach a few select students here. The rest of my work is at the conservatory." "It's lovely," Rose said, instantly feeling more at ease in this intimate space than she would have in a formal institution. Please, make yourself comfortable at the piano, Eleanor gestured. Play whatever you'd like. Rose sat at the nearest piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. This instrument was even finer than the one at the Jefferson Center, responsive to the lightest touch with a warm, rich tone. She began with the same Chopin nocturne she'd played at the charity event, then transitioned into a Debussy piece she'd taught herself years ago. Eleanor listened with her eyes closed, occasionally nodding or smiling slightly. When Rose finally stopped playing, the older woman remained silent for a long moment. You have a rare gift, she said finally. Your technique is unorthodox. Sometimes you use fingerings that would make my conservatory colleagues cringe. But your musicality, your innate understanding of the emotional landscape of these pieces, is exceptional. Rose looked down at her hands. I just play what I feel in the music. Exactly, Eleanor said, moving to sit beside her on the bench. And that's not something I can teach. But I can help you develop the technical foundation to express that feeling even more clearly. She demonstrated a passage from the Chopin, her fingers moving with practiced precision. See how this fingering gives you more control over the dynamics? For the next hour, they worked together, with Eleanor offering gentle suggestions and Rose adapting quickly to the new approaches. By the time they finished, Rose felt both exhausted and exhilarated. You're a natural teacher, she told Eleanor. I've learned more in this hour than in years of figuring things out on my own. Eleanor smiled. And you're a natural student, open, responsive, without the ego that gets in the way of so many talented players. She closed the piano lid thoughtfully. I'd like to propose something. Not formal lessons necessarily, but regular sessions. Let's call them musical conversations. We'll work on technique when needed, but mostly focus on deepening your already impressive interpretive abilities. I'd like that, Rose said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As they discussed scheduling, Eleanor's phone chimed with a message. She glanced at it, then looked up with an intrigued expression. It seems your video continues to make waves. Anton is being interviewed about it on Classical Connection tomorrow. She showed Rose the notification. He's speaking very highly of you from what I hear. Rose felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride. I still can't believe any of this is happening. The internet has changed how musical talent gets discovered, Eleanor said. 20 years ago, you might have played beautifully your entire life with only a few friends ever hearing you. Now one authentic moment can reach millions. As Rose drove home that evening, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed in just 2 days. Her phone contained dozens more messages, from old friends who'd recognized her in the video, from piano enthusiasts asking about her musical background, even from a small record label specializing in classical music. She pulled into her apartment complex and sat in her car for a moment, looking up at the stars visible between the buildings. Her grandmother had always told her that music was her special gift. Not everyone can speak this language, she'd say, guiding Rose's small hands over the keys. But you can, my dear, and someday others will hear what you have to say. Rose had never imagined that someday would arrive like this, through an unexpected challenge, a moment of courage, and a video that captured something genuine in a world hungry for authenticity. When she entered her apartment, she went straight to her old upright piano in the corner of the living room. Its familiar wooden bench creaked as she sat down, just as it had thousands of times before. She placed her hands on the keys that had been her confidants through years of joy and sorrow, triumph and disappointment, and she began to play, not Chopin or Debussy this time, but a simple melody she'd composed herself years ago. It had never had a name, but tonight, as her fingers found the familiar pattern, she decided to call it Unexpected Turn. As the gentle notes filled her small apartment, Rose felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced since childhood. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time in years she was curious to discover where it might lead. In another part of town, Anton Volkov sat in his hotel room, watching the video of Rose playing for what must have been the 20th time. Something about her performance had awakened questions he'd been avoiding throughout his celebrated career. About authenticity, about the true purpose of music, about the price of technical perfection. Tomorrow, he would need to address these questions publicly in his interview. And for the first time in many years, the famous pianist wasn't entirely sure what he would say. 6 months had passed since that fateful night at the Jefferson Arts Center. The autumn chill had given way to winter snow, then spring blossoms, and now early summer warmth filled the air. Outside a small recital hall on the edge of town, a modest crowd gathered, chatting excitedly as they waited for the doors to open. "Did you see her on Classical Connection?" asked an older woman, clutching her program. Her companion nodded. "Remarkable story. From bookkeeper to recording artist in 6 months, and all because some famous pianist tried to embarrass her." Inside the hall, Rose sat alone in the green room, her fingers moving silently over her lap as she mentally rehearsed the program. Tonight marked her first public recital, a small, intimate event organized by Eleanor Chen for her advanced students. When Eleanor had first suggested including her in the showcase, Rose had refused, insisting she wasn't ready. But over months of weekly musical conversations that had evolved into proper lessons, her confidence had grown alongside her technique. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Eleanor entered, elegant in a simple black dress. "How are you feeling?" Rose gave a shaky smile. Terrified, excited, grateful all at once. Eleanor sat beside her. "That's exactly how you should feel. The day a performer stops feeling that mixture before going on stage is the day the magic begins to fade." The past 6 months had transformed Rose's life in ways she still struggled to comprehend. The viral video had eventually amassed over 2 million views, spawning dozens of articles with headlines like "Bookkeeper Stuns Piano Virtuoso" and "The Amateur Who Played from the Heart." For a few weeks, she had been inundated with interview requests, social media attention, and even offers from small recording companies. She had declined most of it, choosing instead to focus on her weekly sessions with Eleanor and the new musical world opening before her. Her job had been understanding, allowing her to adjust her hours to accommodate her growing commitments to music. Nights and weekends were devoted to practice, her old upright piano now supplemented by a digital keyboard that allowed her to practice with headphones late into the evening. "Anton called," Eleanor said casually. "He wanted to wish you luck tonight." Rose looked up in surprise. "He remembered?" Eleanor chuckled. "Of course he remembered. He's been following your progress through me. That's why he made the introduction in the first place. He recognized something special in your playing." After his televised interview about the Cinderella pianist, as the media had dubbed her, Anton had returned to his international touring schedule, but he had stayed in touch with Eleanor, occasionally asking about Rose's development. "He's in Vienna this week," Eleanor continued, "but he said he looks forward to hearing the recording." Another change in Rose's life, the constant documentation of her musical journey. At Eleanor's suggestion, she had started recording her practice sessions, listening back to track her progress. Tonight's recital would be professionally recorded with copies made available to the performers and their families. "5 minutes," called a voice from the hallway. Rose took a deep breath. "I should warn you, I changed the program slightly." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Oh? I'm still playing the Chopin and the Debussy we prepared, but I've added something at the end." "Something I wrote." Eleanor's expression softened. "Your own composition?" "Rose, that's wonderful. You never mentioned you were composing?" Rose shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It's something I've done privately for years, but after everything that's happened, it felt right to include it tonight. It's called Unexpected Turn." The stage manager appeared at the door. "We're ready for you, Miss Miller." Rose stood, smoothing the skirt of the simple blue dress she'd chosen for tonight. Not the formal black attire of a concert pianist, but not the everyday clothes of a bookkeeper either. Something in between, like Rose herself. Eleanor squeezed her hand. "Remember what we've discussed. Connect with the music first and the audience will follow." The small recital hall was filled to capacity, about 100 people, including family members of the other performers, local music enthusiasts, and a few people who had recognized Rose from her video. Among them sat Herbert Wilson, the retired music professor who had applauded her first, and Thomas, the young server whose recording had changed her life. Diane sat in the front row, giving an enthusiastic thumbs up as Rose walked onto the stage. Beside her was Rose's supervisor from the accounting firm, and several co-workers who had supported her dual life as bookkeeper and budding pianist. Rose took her place at the piano, adjusting the bench just as she had learned to do in her lessons with Eleanor. She looked out at the audience, not a vast concert hall filled with strangers, but a warm gathering of people who had in various ways become part of her musical journey. "Good evening," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Thank you for coming tonight. I'll be playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece that started this unexpected chapter in my life, followed by Debussy's Clair de Lune, and concluding with an original composition." She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The Chopin flowed from her fingers with both the emotional depth that had always been her strength and a new technical assurance gained through months of dedicated study. She still played with her eyes closed during the most moving passages, but now her posture was more balanced, her fingering more efficient, her control of dynamics more precise. As she transitioned to the Debussy, Rose felt the nervousness fall away. This was why she played, not for applause or recognition, but for the pure joy of bringing these notes to life, of speaking in a language that needed no words. When she finished Clair de Lune, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause began. Rose smiled at the audience, then turned back to the piano for her final piece. "This last piece is something I composed over the years, though it didn't have a name until recently," she explained. "It's called Unexpected Turn, kind which seems fitting given the path my life has taken." The melody that filled the hall was simple yet distinctive, echoes of Chopin's romanticism blended with more modern harmonies. It told the story of her journey, the opening tentative and questioning, the middle section tumultuous and challenging, the final movement resolving into quiet confidence. As she played the concluding notes, Rose felt a sense of completion, of having come full circle from that nerve-wracking moment at the charity event to this deliberate sharing of her musical voice. The applause was warm and genuine. As Rose stood to take her bow, she saw Eleanor at the back of the hall, smiling proudly. After the recital, as audience members gathered in the lobby for refreshments, Rose found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Herbert Wilson clasped her hand warmly. "That original composition shows remarkable promise," he said. "You found your voice not just as an interpreter but as a creator." Thomas approached shyly. "I brought you something," he said, handing her a small wrapped package. Thank you for changing my perspective on music, and for not being angry about the video." Inside was a beautifully bound blank music notebook. "For your future compositions," he explained. As the crowd began to thin, Rose's phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unfamiliar international number, but the content made the sender clear. "Your playing continues to evolve while retaining that essential quality that makes it uniquely yours. The student in you is learning, but the artist in you is teaching us all. Brava. A.V." Rose smiled, tucking the phone away as Eleanor joined her. "So," her teacher said, "how does it feel to be on this side of a performance?" Rose considered the question. "Different than I expected. Less terrifying, more connecting." Eleanor nodded. "That's the secret most performers never discover. That true. Music making isn't about impressing an audience, but about sharing something genuine with them." She gestured to the people still mingling in the lobby. "Look around. You've touched these people tonight just as you touched everyone at the Jefferson Center 6 months ago." "I'm still just a bookkeeper who plays piano," Rose said with a small smile. Eleanor laughed. "No, my dear. You're a pianist who happens to do bookkeeping. There's a difference." Later that night, back in her apartment, Rose sat at her old upright piano. The keys were slightly worn, the action a bit stiff, the tone not as rich as the grand piano she had played tonight. But this faithful instrument had been her companion through years of solitary music making, the place where she had discovered her voice long before anyone else heard it. She played a few notes of her composition, then reached for the blank notebook Thomas had given her. On the first page she wrote a title, Full Circle. Tomorrow she would return to her desk at the accounting firm, entering numbers and balancing books. Next week she would have another lesson with Eleanor. In July she would record a few pieces for a small classical music channel online. In the fall she would play at a local benefit concert, this time as an invited performer rather than an audience member. Her life had expanded in ways she never imagined, all because of a moment when she had found the courage to sit at a piano and play from her heart despite her fears. Outside her window, a gentle summer rain began to fall, providing a soft percussion accompaniment as Rose began to sketch out a new melody. This one felt different, more confident, more intentional. It wasn't born from isolation, but from connection, not just from personal emotion, but from shared experience. Across the ocean, Anton Volkov sat in his hotel room after a sold-out concert. Despite the late hour, he opened his laptop and clicked on a link Eleanor had sent him, a live stream recording of Rose's recital. He listened intently to her performance, noting the technical improvement while appreciating that the essential quality that had first caught his attention remained untouched. When she began to play her original composition, he leaned forward, surprised and moved by what he heard. This was not just a natural talent for interpretation, but a genuine compositional voice finding its first public expression. As the final notes faded, Anton closed his laptop and walked to the window of his luxury hotel suite. The lights of Vienna sparkled below, a city with a rich musical heritage stretching back centuries. In his long career, he had played in the world's most prestigious venues for the most discerning audiences, received accolades and awards, been praised by critics and fellow musicians alike. Yet in recent months, he had found himself thinking often of that charity event and the bookkeeper who played from her heart. Something about her unpolished but profoundly authentic performance had rekindled questions about his own relationship with music, questions he had set aside years ago in pursuit of technical excellence and professional success. His next album, already in the planning stages, would be different from his previous recordings, less focused on technical showpieces, more on works that spoke to the emotional core of human experience. A musical response to the question Rose's playing had posed. What happens when we remove the barriers between ourselves and the music we create? In two very different places, two very different pianists continued their musical journeys. One just beginning a public path she had never sought, one reconsidering a celebrated path he had followed for decades, both forever changed by an unexpected moment of genuine musical connection, a reminder of why they had first fallen in love with the language of notes and keys and heartfelt expression. And somewhere in the digital world, the video that had connected them continued to inspire viewers around the globe, its simple title now a part of musical folklore. A famous pianist asked a woman to play as a joke. The outcome astonished the whole audience.